Hey, welcome. It's Mark, KA6WKE, your virtual Elmer for today. Sorry for 2 minutes delay. Had a little bit of audio issues first thing this morning. But that's the way my week's been going, so no surprise here. I'm going to take a little change here. I've got decided to change the format slightly of the live stream, and I realized that 5-minute banner I was running in the first part to give people a chance to get logged on and things like that. I think I might have my audio a little hot. Yeah, let's back it off a bit. And I deleted that. I just decided after looking at the analytics that it appears to be driving people a bit batty. So I removed that, and we're just going to start right on time. Of course, technical difficulties notwithstanding, I should have gotten here sooner, so that's my fault. We will move forward with this newer format. The other thing is, I do a lot of projects that don't fit into a live stream format, but I thought would be interesting to share anyways, like today's mobile installation tutorial on a vehicle I bought last September, and finally getting around to installing some radios and things in it. It would be very difficult to do a live stream with that. Obviously, my vehicle is not going to fit on my workbench, and I don't have the right cameras to do anything outside of a large scope like this. So I decided to just make it a presentation style. Hopefully not so bad that it's death by PowerPoint. I'm trying to avoid those. So let me see here. I don't want to update now. All right, so let me bring the chat window up. Here, you can ask me questions online while this is going on. And there I am. You can ask questions, and I will answer online. I can't obviously type answers while I'm texting. I cannot text or talk and type at the same time. Just one of my limitations. So with that, let's get started. So I did an installation, a dual bander, an Icom 751A on a 2016 Ford Edge. It's a new to me vehicle. I've been hopping vehicles around as kids left and had extra vehicles to get rid of and so forth, and decided after maintaining a fleet of 5 vehicles for the last, 6 or 7 years, that I wanted something nice for myself and the wife as we travel. We're almost empty nesters here. So we chose a Ford Edge. We really enjoy it. It's very nice vehicle. It's got some quirks in it, what we'll talk about during the show. But the one thing I wanted to do is I wanted to add a dual bander, which I purchased an Icom ID-5100A for myself at Christmas. And my wife really enjoys listening to the scanner while we're traveling. So I'm planning on installing both of those in this vehicle. To get started on any mobile installation, the first thing you want to do is spend a lot of time doing your research on your vehicle. First thing I check with is to make sure that there aren't any manufacturer type warnings about the installation of radios in the vehicle itself. Some have. They may have a power limit of like 100 watts or 50 watts or something like that. So you want to make sure that you've researched that part to make sure it's going to be okay. Now this vehicle is not a hybrid or an electric vehicle. It's a straight 4-cylinder gas engine that I found out has this zero idle or near zero idle. So when you come to a stop at a stoplight, if you've been sitting there for a few, about 10 seconds or so, the engine shuts off. So I thought that was going to be a problem, because starting and stopping engines with radios connected in and things like that can cause them to reset or put additional strain on them as the voltages jump around. between the 12.5 volts when the engine's off and the roughly 14. This vehicle is 14.5 volts when the engine's running. So this leads into a discussion on batteries. So this is a dual bander installation. It doesn't require a second battery. I see a lot of people put second batteries in when they have an HF rig that's drawing 22 amps on peaks, and they believe having a second battery in the vehicle while they're driving is beneficial, and that's not the case. So you can save yourself a huge step there by not going to the investment of a second battery. The charging, I forgot what the unit that's called, that connects the batteries together so they can charge at the same time and things like that. The reason is when you start your vehicle, your voltage jumps up. Like I said, it's 12.3 volts or 4 volts with the engine off on this edge, and then runs to 14.5 when the engine's running. Well, when the engine's running and the alternator is producing power, that takes over. You could actually take your battery out of your vehicle's going to run. It's not in play any longer. It's simply there. It's going to get recharged after the start, which takes a lot of current to do, several hundred amps sometimes, depending on the temperature. So you don't need that while you're driving. If you plan on doing a lot of fixed operation, of course, your engine's off, having a second battery there, a dedicated radio battery so that you can use. Oh, it's a battery isolator. That's what I was looking for. So you don't drain the main battery that can start your engine. So that's really going to be problematic here. Hold on, where'd my notes go? My notes disappeared. All right, so to get started, once you've looked at your you've done the research of the vehicle to make sure everything's okay as far as the electronics go. What I like to do is I start under the hood. I start under the hood and start looking for ways to running the power cable from the battery through to the inside of the cab. Okay. I prefer to always directly connect to the battery. Even on a mobile rig that's only drawn 10 amps or so at 50 watts. By doing this, it does allow you to have the vehicle off, and you can still use the radio, and that's fine. Plus, the battery also acts like a huge filter. It'll help with the additional electronic noise that can be produced on the power ports, or the old school cigarette lighters, in your vehicle. So there's a whole bunch of electronics in modern vehicles these days. That would be an interesting tutorial or demonstration to see exactly what noise is generated from the various power ports inside this vehicle, and there's a USB charging port as well. See how that goes. To see what kind of noise is there compared to what's on the battery. I lost my... Hold on, where's... Okay, I lost my chat, sorry about that. Pop-out chat, that's what I'm looking for. Boy, there's a lot to learn when you're doing live streaming, all the technology that goes behind it, and organization and stuff, so... yeah, it's been fun. Anyways, definite learning process. So you look for a way inside, and the next thing, and I kind of jumped ahead on power. So the next topic is safety. Let's see. No, I'll stay. I'm going to jump back to the research slide. So once you have a way into the cab you found a way into your cab with power, then I start looking under the dashboards and things, and for space to install the main body, or if your rig doesn't have a separate head unit, the ID-5100A has a separate head unit to it, and it cannot be attached to the main body, so you have to stash the main body somewhere. So I start looking around and making notes of places where this could fit. Um, I decide on what antennas I'm going to run. Almost always drill NMO mounts through the roof for my antennas, and we'll talk a little more about that later about drilling holes. And this is part of the research that you want to do, um, is to make sure that when you are drilling holes in your vehicle, that it's going to work, because you cannot undrill a hole. And we'll talk more about that in the uh, on the antenna slide. So you decide what type of antennas you want. I'm going with NMO mounts. Some people can use mag mounts or lip mounts, things like that. Those lip mount wasn't going to work on this vehicle because the back hatch uh, is edge to edge glass, so you can't clamp onto that. I thought about making some little brackets that I could fit in there and have them off the back of the hatch, but then I kind of drew some hand sketches and realized that's probably going to look pretty awful. Um, I didn't want to turn this thing into what looked like a bumper car going down the road. Uh, so there are some additional things you want to figure out. You want to, there are other, you may have external speak. You may need an external speaker, which I did with this installation. Where can you put the microphone when you're not using the radio? Um, uh, Pretty much those are the big topics. Looking for ways to run the power cable once you're inside the cab. How are you going to route that in a safe way that doesn't interfere with the operation of your vehicle? And that brings up the next topic, is safety. So I love HF Mobile. If you go to my website, www.ka6wke.net, it's on the screen here. Um, you can see I've done half a dozen mobiles over 37 years as a ham. Uh, at When I was younger, I lived in apartments. It was the only way I could get on the air was mobile. And my first mobile was a 1982 Mercury Capri hatchback that I put a Yaesu FT101E in the passenger seat belted it in, and ran 10 Tech mobile verticals off the back hatch. And in 1987, that was awesome because it was at the peak of the sunspot cycle back then, and it was, you could talk the world with it. It was just a lot of fun. And then as I got married and became a dad and so forth, I had no bench time when the kids were small. I, you know, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir on a lot of the viewers. Your family comes first. Amateur radio is a hobby. So I built a lot of mobiles because I drove a lot for my job, and it was a great way I could still get on the air and operate and all that. So you can go through the different mobiles that I had. And I had the best one I felt I ever did was the 2004 Dodge Cummins Diesel, the 2500. Uh, that had 4 different radios in it, all kinds of antennas and stuff like that, and it worked like you wouldn't believe. It was a lot of fun, especially running 160 meter mobile. Had a 500 watt amplifier in the back, and that was a lot of fun. I impressed a lot of people. I even met Art Bell on 80 meters one night driving across the high desert of Southern California. And we had a nice chat for, I don't know, 5-6 minutes. He had a lot of his cronies on frequency and things like that. So, anyways, you get a lot of fun memories with it. But I always made sure that how my radios were installed in my vehicle did not interfere with the proper operation of driving. Driving the vehicle, that is your number one thing. You don't want microphones in the way of airbags in newer vehicles. Getting to the different controls and things inside your vehicle, shifting. You don't want cables down near your feet for braking and things like that. You want to keep your installation nice and neat and doesn't block you from properly driving the vehicle in a safe manner. Also, most people nowadays are dealing with airbags. So you never want anything, any part of your installation to be in front of an airbag. Because one, if it goes off, if you're unfortunate in an accident and it goes off, that's going to become a missile right towards you. Or if it's a strong enough cable, for example, say you're running your antennas from your roof uh, through the roof and down the side columns between the doors um, down to the floor of your vehicle, you don't want it to go around, say, in front of an airbag. That'll stop it from functioning properly. So you don't want to do that. You really want to spend a lot of time making sure you've researched your vehicle, that you've got safe places to put all your equipment. You can still safely drive, and it doesn't, drive any different when a good measure is, can I drive the vehicle in the same manner with everything turned off? So if you can do that, then you have a good installation. So let's start with the power. Getting power from the inside of inside of the engine compartment to the inside of the cab where your radios are going to be used to be pretty easy. Sometimes there was simple ways through firewalls in older vehicles you can run the cable through, but most modern vehicles, one, don't have enough room that you can actually get to a firewall, and that's the case I have with this vehicle. And even driving the vehicle up on ramps and looking underneath and so forth, there was just no way to do it in that fashion. So for probably the last 4 vehicles I've done installations on, I've gone through the side pillar on the driver's side typically. So what I do is I get the cable. Typically the cable that comes with the rig radio won't be long enough. It wasn't in my case, and it was only 14 gauge wire, which I thought was a little lean for a radio on a long cable like that. So I went out and purchased some 12 gauge instead for this radio. And I'm sorry for the instructions popping up like this here on the screen. I'm sharing the whole screen. And what I did is I, off to the left here on the side of the shock tower is where the battery is located. So what I do is I start with the cable in the center of the engine compartment. And then I will find my way through fenders and things. And in this vehicle, there's a way through the fender right here. I had to remove some trim, and this is the driver's side door. I had to move some trim and poke a little hole through. It was a spongy material, probably used just to stop the body panel from vibrating or something like that. So I poked a hole through it with a large screwdriver, a Phillips screwdriver, and poked it through in order to get it here. So now we're on the other side. This is the piece that I showed you that's this piece. This is plastic, but right beside it is a piece of metal trim that I can't remove easily. Found a way through here. You can see where the power cable makes its way through the fender like that. And then to determine the length, I always run my cable along the kickboard on the outside of the vehicle into the center of the cab, right in between the seats. This will come in handy later on when you start seeing the full installation in that. So once I've decided that, I need to build up a set of harnesses to connect directly to the battery. So my local Home Cheapo store has these nice mini blade fuse ATC fuses that can be attached to that 12 gauge wire and connect directly to the battery. Now I spent time making sure these are very nice connections. You can just crimp them. This is a standard ring connector designed for 12 gauge wire. You can just crimp them, but when I'm connecting to the battery, I found it better to crimp and solder, because the soldering will help lessen the chance of corrosion eating away at the copper wire. You've seen battery terminals that get that white powdery stuff on it. You don't want that to happen here. That'll develop into actually some kind of diode, and could add a lot of noise, inject a lot of noise into your power cable and drop the voltage. So where I can, I solder the connections down. Now this butt connector here, uh, I trim off the excess plastic. That can only be crimped down, but I think that's sufficiently far enough away from the battery not to worry about. This is probably 7 inches long. A heat shrink. I put heat shrink on it as well to give it some protection and makes it look like a more professional installation. So once all that's done and I have the connection to the battery already, I attach it, but I don't put any fuses in the holders yet. So both leads get fuses. Some will argue you only need really the positive side, but I had a situation in my Dodge, in my truck, where I had run, it was 8-gauge cable from one of the batteries into the cab to power the radio stack and the amplifier. So it was capable of supporting a large amount of current just by itself. What happened was the ground to my engine block had somehow worked its way loose a little bit. I went in after work to start the engine, and it tried to start and then quit starting. So I wasn't sure what was going on. I tried my radios just to see, and there was no power to the radio, so I knew that fuse blew. What happened was the ground fuse blew because the path of least resistance for the starter motor on a 6-cylinder diesel engine was going through my radios. You don't want that. That's going to cause some problems. It could just fry everything, for one thing. And you don't, that's something you really want to avoid. So for a couple of extra dollars to have a fuse in the ground line can also protect your radios. So I always do double fuses. I chose these style because they're the more common fuses these days. You can still get the round ones and put those in there as well. If you go the round route and where you can unscrew the connector and pull the fuse out, or fuse holder, and pull the fuse out, what you want to do is you want to have them in opposite directions. So for example, if this is the barrel of the fuse, you want the part that unscrews on this side connecting to the battery. On the ground, you want the screw side, let's see if I can get this right vision. I should have taken a picture of it. You want the screw side on this side, on this side, and the barrel on this side. So that way you can't cross-connect the two and accidentally reverse polarity on your radios. Actually, no, I said that backwards. You want the screw connector here on this side, connection to ground, and the barrel side here. So that way you don't have to worry about accidentally reversing the polarity. That would definitely ruin your day. So this connection is not, I still think I said that backwards, but I'm going to leave it alone. You get the idea. You don't want to reverse polarity. So I mentioned earlier that you don't want to, that you want to connect directly to the battery. Well, with Ford and their infinite wisdom for designing this vehicle, half of this battery is under a cowling that leads up to the windshield wipers. So in order to get the battery out to connect to the very back of it, which you can't reach with tools and it's difficult to reach with your hands, you'd have to remove all of the intake, the air filter and all the plastic in order to unbolt this and slide the battery out. Give me 1 second here. All right. Well, that was not going to be the case with this installation. So in the research phase, when I made my notes of where to connect to the battery, this is either a 10 gauge or 8 gauge wire. It does connect through through the comb binding, the comb here, to the negative post in the back. So I made a design change, decided I'm just going to bolt it to the chassis ground right here. This the battery connector here already had a nice post. I'll switch screens. Already had a nice post to screw directly in. I didn't have to do anything fancy. Sometimes you can back this out, unbolt this. There may be a thread stop at the end of this, so it gets a little tough, but you can still work the nut off, and you can attach it here. Again, I went to my Home Cheapo store and I bought stainless steel nuts that fit the threads. They're metric of some kind, I don't remember, and some washers. So I could easily and nicely connect to the battery. The same thing with the ground. Now I know it's got a red wire, it should be black, but I could not get the fusible connections here with black. They were all red. So you can look for already existing places to connect to the battery. Sometimes you can buy a battery. If you need to replace your battery, you can try finding a battery that has dual posts, where it's posts on the side. I think some GM vehicles have that, some Ford, and top posts as well. So there you can use the side posts to connect directly to the battery, and that's another way to do it. But again, that's another expense. But if it's your only way to do it, then you're kind of stuck. But if you have an old battery, go ahead and replace it with a dual post. Okay, so that's the connection to the ground. So now we're on the side of the vehicle. We've run our cable. It's attached to the battery. The fuses are removed from the fuse holders. We made it through the fender. And now, how do we get inside? Well, a lot of vehicles these days have some grommet that goes into the cab. My last 3 or 4 vehicles were done this way, and they all worked great. It was easy to get in. You put the grommet, slice a hole. Don't punch a hole. You don't want gaps, but slice a hole with a knife or something. Feed it through. Feed the power cable all the way through it, and then you start feeding it into that hole on the side of the pillar there. So what I do is I make one of these handy dandy little tools out of a coat hanger, so I can fish through a hole after you can barely see it right here, cable going through the pillar into the space between the pillar, and this is the dash where I've removed some trim, and I use that coat hanger fisher to reach in and grab the cable and pull it through. So there's a couple things with this photo. One, you really want to purchase the tools for removing dashboard components and trim. I don't recommend you use screwdrivers. They have sharp edges. They're typically too fat, and they can cause your trim to break or crack. Now, the older the vehicle, the more fragile the trim pieces are. So this vehicle was only 2 years old. They were still fairly flexible in things, and it was okay. The other thing to pay attention to when you remove trim is go slow. Take your time. You don't want to just jam a tool in there and just leverage it out, just pop it out. You will break things. Some trim fit in holes. They just push in. Some have a nylon support that gets where the trim slides on top of in order to be retained against the metal. You also want to pay attention to those parts of the trim that do get pushed into something. So even though I could have pulled the cable through this hole, that hole is used by the trim piece to stay in place. So that would have been a problem. This slot down here wasn't used for anything. I don't know why it was there, but it is. So I ran the cable through here. Um, Now we're looking down. You can see where the cable run through. The cable's been pulled all the way through. I removed this piece here, and here's one of those. It's kind of hard to tell. I guess I should have done a slide on the tools that I used. But I used a trim tool to pop this piece out, run the power cable around through here, and here's some of those nylon slides. I don't know what to call them. Those nylon support pieces, where the trim that fits here slides into, so it can run. When you're putting it back, it slides into here, so it's fastened down properly. So I ran the power cable all the way through here, found a nice exit point. Found a nice exit point, and then went into the middle of the vehicle with it. So that's how I got the power inside the vehicle. Not every vehicle is identical to this one, but in general, it should be roughly the same process. So now that you have your power cable inside the vehicle, you want to start installing the rig part. So I hadn't even really taken this out of the box yet. I had some spots. Actually, I only ended up with one spot underneath the front driver's seat that had room. This vehicle has no room for really anything extra. So pulling everything apart and starting looking at all the mounting pieces that need to be mounted and stuff. And of course, you have to have your favorite beverage while you're doing this. Now, typically, it would take me to do an installation like this. Taking my time and being methodical takes me a day and a half on a weekend. This took probably a month because I had to spend a lot of time on the research, finding places to put radios, removing trim, removing back seats and things, just looking for spots to install things. So what I ended up finding was underneath here is actually a heater vent that blows, underneath the seat. I mounted the radio on top of that. It's thick plastic, so it supports the radio just fine. And in your radio instructions, you will find a blurb in there about not installing it so the radio doesn't, so your vehicle heater doesn't blow directly on the radio. Well, this really doesn't. It's hard to tell, but there's like a half-inch gap between the bottom of the radio body and the heater vent, and it blows this way away from it. So it's not really going to get directly blown on. I decided to mount it in this direction because it gave me easy access to the various connectors, the SD card that you can use with these radios, and it moved the fan and the heater fan and the heatsink to the opposite side of where the hot air would come out. So that worked well. I leave the original OEM power connector attached to the radio. Some people cut this off and use power poles, and I guess that's fine. But I leave the original power connector on, and then from the cable that originally came with the radio, I cut it off about a foot or so long for this installation. Your install might be a little longer, and put power poles on the one end that doesn't have the OEM power connector on it. So now, once that's figured out for the installation, is mounting this head unit. The ID-5100A has a separate head unit. There's no way to attach it to the main body. So the rig has to be split. Your installation, like when I had my 2710, Icom 2710 dual bander, the head could come off or be attached to the body. The installation I did in an E150 van, the rig and the head unit stayed together. That was an easy installation. Same with the Taurus, which is on my website. It could stay together. But here I couldn't do that. So the Ford Edge has this little compartment on top of the dashboard. I don't know what you use it for. It's not very deep or anything. I guess you could put gloves in there, but you know, this is Southern California. You don't really wear a lot of gloves out here. Uh, so what I did was I noticed from a previous installation, this is called a vehicle-specific mount, and it was actually specifically designed for the Dodge, the 2004 Dodge Cummins truck. If you slid the radio out of the dash of the truck, this bolted in right behind it very nicely. You slid the radio back in, and it looks like a professional mount, which it is. Well, it just so happened to work exactly correct for this installation in the Edge. The bend of the metal matched the height of the depth of this compartment. So very carefully, I drilled holes through the plastic and used essentially sheet metal screws to fasten this down. Now, I drilled in the blind on this, meaning I did not pull the dash apart to take a look to see if any wires or cables were running underneath this compartment. It's been my experience when you're this high in the dash, I've not seen anything. Of course, I could always be wrong. Drilling through a bundle of cables will probably render your vehicle useless and possibly irreparable. That wouldn't go over well with the XYL if you have one, or your bank account, I'm sure. So what I did in this situation is I drilled the holes using a very high speed, and carefully, as soon as it broke through, I just pulled out. So I maybe went an 1/8 inch below the plastic. I fastened it all in, and once it was all screwed in, I mounted the head unit, the head mount, to the vehicle-specific mount. I was very fortunate. The mounting screws for the Icom head mount here match the distance between corners here on the hypotenuse of this mount, and fit just fine, so I didn't have to do any additional metal work. This here is a wooden shim. I found out after driving it around for a few days that it vibrated a lot. The head vibrated a lot, and it was kind of driving me batty. So I created this little, typical wooden shim you would use for, let's say, a door jamb, or you're installing a door, and you use this to level the door out. So I cut the tip off of that, wrapped it in plastic so it didn't chirp, or electrical tape so it didn't squeak, and shoved it in there. And this made it a little more vibration resistant, but not perfectly. Hit a hard enough bump, and the head will bounce up and down. From there, this is what it looks like when it's installed. It ended up being better than I had anticipated. When I'm sitting there, it does not block my view. It's a quick, if I need to read the screen, it's just a quick glance at it. I don't have to look down at my radio like I did in some of my other installs where I had to take my eyes completely off the road to make some changes and things that I don't typically do. So, for example, you use the radio long enough, you're going to know where the volume knob is, where the squelch is, the VFO, things like that. But sometimes while you're driving, you need to make a menu change. So with this setup, I was able to put it in such a way that it's no different really than if you have a mount for your cell phone up here on one of the temporary mounts. I didn't go with a temporary mount. I could have, but I wanted it connected firmly, attached firmly to the dashboard. On the back of the head, there's two very powerful magnets that get screwed in, and then it just attaches right here. I could have screwed through here and permanently attached it, but sometimes I park my vehicle in places where it's going to be alone out in public for a day or two. Say I'm hiking the Grand Canyon or whatever with my friends. I want to be able to pull this off and put it in the glove box, so it's not so obvious that there's a radio in view. Now comes the cables. So um, I think that now that we're well past the year 2000, that these remote heads can be made wireless, either through a Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. This does have Bluetooth with it to communicate with. Well, no, it's a separate purchase that goes into the main unit under the seat that allows you to control the radio and program it and things through an app, an Android app, or I think iOS as well. But if they can do that, they can make that functionality also in the head unit, either through Bluetooth or Wi-Fi if they need more bandwidth than Bluetooth, um, and connect it that way. The days of cable connections, I don't know. I see that as going away. It would have made the installation a little quicker, a little nicer because you didn't have to figure out how to run your cables. But I needed to run my cables somehow, and I didn't want them just dangling around the dashboard, getting into the heater vent here, AC vent, blocking the radio, blocking the screen, things like that. So what I do in that case when I have to run cables along a dashboard is I put on a heavy-duty wire tie on the cable, and I cut it off on an angle. This is about an inch long, maybe inch and a half. You might have to go a little further. But what I do is I use one of the dashboard tools, trim tools, and I carefully separate the pieces apart of the dashboard. And then I slide that little tail of the zip tie in there. When I remove the tool, the dashboard goes back in place and squeezes that little tail. So now the cable is not going to move. It's going to be attached to your dashboard. So you can see now how I ran it. I put one wire tie up here for the radio, for the head, ran it down the dashboard. So I made sure it's nice and straight as possible, going in between the vent and the radio controls, so it doesn't get in the way of either one. Ran it down the seam of this part here, put another one down here to keep it tight against the front of the dash. Put another one down here where it was going to make this turn to go in behind this panel. I should have taken another picture of this one that I can now see, where it goes underneath this panel back to the driver's seats right here in this photo, back to underneath the radio. So now here's the complete installation. Base units here. The power I brought in, that came out black and white for some odd reason. Well, in the back here. This power right here is what's coming from the engine compartment. This power here is the little pigtail I made for the rig itself. I liked rig runners. I put a 4005 rig runner under the seat. It just sits there. It's not really going to go anywhere. And so I can in the future I can power if I need other power for different things. So you notice I have fuses in here as well. There's a 20 amp fuse for the input. So the power cable running into the engine compartment is fused at both ends. And that's also, very important to do. Have them fused at both ends because maybe you don't need the full 20 amps coming in. In this case, I did, so they match. But if you only needed a 10 amp fuse here, if something happens on any of these other ports that draws more than 10 amps, it'll blow, but the ones in the engine compartment won't. that way, if there's a problem between the battery and this connection coming into the rig runner, then if those short out somehow, the fuses in the engine compartment will protect that part. Okay, so you're double fused. This radio takes 15 amps. The manual has 20 amp fuses in it, so it's all 20 amps right now. I have plans for an amplified speaker, so that'll probably go take another port. I want to use the cover here. I want to mount a powered speaker inside the compartment with a speaker grill cut into the lid. That's the plans. That's going to require me to take the dashboard apart a little bit. So that's the plans for that. This is how the base unit was plugged in. This is the microphone. I needed a microphone extension, which I already had from an Icom 7000 that I didn't use. So that's right here. And it's a little hard to see with this seat power connector for the seat. This is the cable for the head unit, runs up to this, the console, the side of the console, side of the center console, and the cables run up through that to where they come out right here. So you can't see in this picture, but there's a speaker hiding in here. There's like a through hole of some kind that goes through the dash from one side to the other. I don't know what it's for, but I buried the speaker back there, and it's reasonably loud enough using the audio from the head unit directly. I told you my wife likes to listen to Scanner while we're traveling, so this is using a phone mount that fits in the slot for your CD, so it expands and holds it pretty steady. This is just temporary. Handheld scanners, in my opinion, don't work that great in mobile environments. They don't have enough volume for one. Speakers are too small, so it gets kind of tinny sounding. Of course, you have to have the power cables and antenna cables going everywhere. I do have plans on adding a TRX, a Whistler TRX1, or is it the 2? I can't remember. Mobile version of the scanner. It will go, more than likely I'm going to attach it. I'll expand. I have room. I'll expand the mobile mount a little higher using some metal braces of some kind, and mount the scanner above that. And then I can still use the same path to get to the speaker. I do have plans on building a passive audio mixer, because what I want to do is combine both audio outputs from the dual bander, the Icom, and the Whistler scanner into a single powered, high quality powered speaker. I've got some plans. I've done this before. So I'm going to make one of the live streams will be building that and going over how that works. It'll be a while. It'll be a few more months before I can get to that. Take some notes here. Okay, so this is what it looks like. Been driving it around a couple of weeks, and it works very well. Very happy with it. Wife is happy with it. It's not too ugly. It'll look better once this scanner is gone, and I plan on mounting the head to the Whistler scanner right along here. It should fit just fine. It looks like it's going to hit the shifter. It doesn't. There's like an inch gap between there. So that's it. That's the interior. All the cabs laid out nicely. The microphone fits nice in this little compartment here. So now the talk of antennas. Where to put them, how to attach them, and there's a lot of options we can go over. So like like I said in the beginning of the live stream, that I plan on drilling NMO mounts through the roof into the cab. Uh, they will, underneath the roof, there's a path that can go down through here. There's a break in the airbags that I can run the antenna cable down through, and in between the interior trim and this pillar that supports the roof. So that can run underneath the seats into the radio area. Now, maybe you can't do that. You have a leased vehicle, you can't drill holes in it. So drilling holes in vehicles is always a hot topic kind of with people doing mobile installations. The claim is you drill holes in your vehicle, it reduces the value of the vehicle. And I can tell you from many installations where I drilled through my vehicles, it had absolutely no bearing on the cost of the worth of the value of the vehicle on a trade-in. So don't worry about it. If you just simply don't want to because it's too much work, and that's understandable, I would you can go with mag mounts. If those are probably, that's my second recommendation, because you can place mag mounts over the biggest part of the metal of your vehicle, and that's your hood, because since that makes the other half of the antenna. Through capacitive coupling, the driven element here also, the driven elements here, the remaining ground plane is the roof. So as you can see here on this vehicle, this is plastic. This is some kind of fairing in the back. Can't use an edge mount, a trunklet mount there. Even further down, it's glass to glass. I'm sorry, the edge, it's glass to glass. So glass is edge to edge. There we go. I haven't had all my coffee yet. So I can't clamp to that without fear of cracking the back window. So really, for the best performance, though, you want your antenna in the center of the roof of your vehicle. And I understand that, of course, you may have a significant other that's may not like that idea. So, or isn't sure. And what I do in that case, my wife was okay when the vehicle was all my own and I was traveling and all that. She didn't care if I drilled holes in the roof or not. But now that she's more of a passenger, or will use my vehicle to go to work or whatever, go out with friends or something, she has more input on this. So, and I also wasn't sure about placement on this vehicle because the roof is it has some good curves to it. So I didn't want my antennas all pointing in different, all in different directions. They weren't vertical. I have a bit of an OCD with antennas. I like them vertical, evenly spaced, things like that. I don't like them real visible. On my vehicles, the Dodge with the HF screwdriver antenna was huge, but it looked fine on the vehicle. It was a large truck, it was a large antenna, and it didn't look like, like I mentioned before, a bumper car going down the road. So with the smaller vehicle, I wasn't going to use the larger dual band antennas that I had. I had a SGC 7000 on the truck, for example. This would be too big on this vehicle, in my opinion, to look nice. I still like it to look nice. And I wasn't sure about placement and with the curvature of things on where it should go so it looks nice. What kind of distance I needed between. This is the scanner antenna. what distance did I need between the transmit antenna and the receive antenna of the scanner. I didn't want them too close together for fear of blowing out the front end of the scanner. So I did some movement. I used mag mounts, and I placed them differently over the roof for a while and drove around and see how well things worked. I pretty much settled on this configuration. I found the spot on the roof where the antenna is vertical when the vehicle is on a flat, a level surface. So I found that spot. Back here in this corner, on both sides, there are nice flat areas where there should not be any other wiring this far back in the roof. There's the fin for the AM/FM radio, which doesn't work that great on AM when you're out in the fringes. I'm not sure how that, I haven't dropped the headliner yet, how that's cabled in. It maybe just goes straight down the middle or something. But running coax nearby won't bother it. So I've been driving around with this configuration for the last couple of weeks. It works great. Both scanner and dual bander. There's no crazy wind noise. I put heat shrink over the coil of the dual band antenna to stop it from whistling. There's times when I've been traveling and the wind's blowing just right and I'm driving just at the right speed, and it whistles like you blow across a bottle. It can get very loud. It's very annoying. One time I just pulled over and threw the antenna in the trunk. I just had enough of it. So I put heat shrink over that to stop that from happening. The scanner antenna here is, they claim, down to 25 megahertz, but I kind of doubt it. But most of the stuff is from low band VHF through UHF, 800 megahertz systems. I'll do the same here with this. I'll put heat shrink over the coil. Now this was a through glass. Originally it was a through glass scanner antenna, but I have no way to use the through glass because all the glass in the back behind these doors is all tinted, and typically that tinting is metallic, so the signals aren't going to penetrate through. Maybe they'll be very weak, or if not at all. So I couldn't go that route with a glass mount, but I liked the whip a lot. It was not too large, not too short. I thought it was a good middle ground. So I pulled the ferrule off the base of this antenna, and it just so happened to fit the ferrule for a Motorola antenna. They have a spike antenna, a quarter wave ground plane antenna, NMO mount, where the NMO portion is straight through. This is not. This has a matching coil in a matching unit in the base, so it's not a straight through. I have one that's straight through, so it happened to fit that ferrule, so I was able to just slide the antenna in and tighten the set screws. And I had another mag mount that accepted the ferrule, so I put it there. I don't notice any interference between the scanner or the radio. Sometimes scanners can broadcast a little tiny, very weak signal, but I've had older dual banders and older scanners where you can hear it buzzing in the dual bander. So I don't have any of that noise. I can run when the scanner's receiving, like the National Weather Service. I can run high power on 2 meters. It doesn't bother it at all, which is 50 watts. That's what I was looking for. It doesn't bother the scanner in terms of desensing, meaning the receiver is so overloaded by a close by signal that it loses sensitivity to the signal that you want to listen to. And I use the National Weather Service frequencies because they're fairly close to the 2 meter. Um, on 440, no issues either. Listening to 700 and 800 megahertz trunk systems, so that works fine. So I'm going to drive around with this. It's going to be a couple of months before I can get back to actually drilling the roof and pulling cables and all that stuff, uh, just to make sure I like it. I think I do, but I want to spend more time with it. I want to take a couple trips with it first to see how well it does out in fringe areas, out in the high desert and things, traveling. I may also, on the other side, also drill and put a third NMO mount back here and just put a cap on it for future expansion later on if I want to add another radio underneath the. I've got even more room under the passenger seat, so I could add a third radio. And with the passive audio mixer in there, I plan on building a 4-channel one. I could all share it through a single speaker. So that pretty much that's a wrap. That's that's the installation tutorial for a standard HF dual bander radio. It doesn't need to be dual bander; it can be a single band as well. Most of the radios of this type are about the same size, no matter what the manufacturer is. So you can fit, these steps are. I try to keep things generic enough that you could apply them to your vehicle and just figure out the details as you research your own vehicle and get ready to do your own installation. And if you do your own installation, I like to see it. So send me a picture or 9 to my email address at mark@ka6wke.net. You can reach me there. The website for this live stream is on my website, actually, of course, at www.ka6wke.net//live-stream. You can find the homepage there for this and links to previous videos. This is videos. This is actually the lucky video, number 7, episode 7. Let's see. Facebook as well, /KA6WKE. There's the Facebook page for that. You can like that. I do announcements on that page for upcoming shows. You can reach me on Twitter as well. Same thing, KA6WKE on Twitter. I do my announcements for shows there as well. You can email me. There's also an announcement-only email list that I didn't put here, but I'll put down in the description. It's a groups.io announcement-only list where I announce upcoming shows. I announce when they've been posted, and that's all that's on there. There's no discussion. It's very low volume, so you should get. Right now, it's four emails a month. Let's see what else I have. Okay, so for wrapping up the show, we've got my next live stream was scheduled for February 16th. I will be at the Yuma Hamfest that weekend with my dad, who's a non-ham. He had a call sign 20 years ago, but let it lapse, so maybe I can get him interested in getting his ticket back. And he lives in the Phoenix area, so that's a hop, skip, and a jump on D-Star or DMR radio to talk to each other. So I will be there. There will be no live stream that day, and we will resume the first Saturday. Oh my gosh, it's March. The first Saturday of March. I don't know what the date is. You can look it up on the calendar. And on that show, I'm planning on, we'll be back to live stream. I'm planning on a project of using a computer power supply to build a lab power variable power supply, both in voltage and current. I'll show you how to build one. I've used one before. I don't know if I have a picture of it, but I will find one. I built out of a computer power supply, and it had all the voltages uh, and a variable section. Um, but I outgrew it, and I bought a CORAD one, a KA3305D variable power supply, both in voltage and current, and fixed 5 volts. But I'll show, instead of spending a couple $100 doing that, I'll show you how to build something very similar using uh, a regular PC power supply and some voltage control units I found some high quality ones on eBay that I've used in the past. So we will build a single channel variable and 2-channel fixed, or maybe 3-channel fixed, and we'll go over how to how to build that, and I will leave it up to you what kind of case you want to put it in. So we'll have all the guts laid out on the bench, and hopefully this will be a nice low-cost addition to your bench for your electronics experiments. They come in very handy. So with that, I'm going to say 7-3, and I will, as they say, catch you further down the log, and I will speak to you again the first Saturday of March. 7-3.